Hi, everyone. Welcome to the first Riot Lunch and Learn of 2021. My name is Caroline Griffin. I am Riot's Director of Operations, and we are super excited to have Rob Holt here from iCertifi to kick off our first Colorado Lunch and Learn of ever, including 2021. So there'll be a lot more to come, but we're super thankful to Rob, who is actually a new sponsor of Riot, to joining this very special Lunch and Learn today. So just a couple of reminders before we get started. If you have any questions throughout the presentation, please do put those in the chat box, and I will make sure all of them get answered at the end of the presentation. If you do have any notified body specific questions, we may skip over those and connect you directly to Rob after the Lunch and Learn. But other than that, this presentation will be recorded, so you will be able to find it on Riot's YouTube channel and the meetup page after the Lunch and Learn. But without further ado, I will hand it over to the man you are here to see today, Rob Holt. Thanks for being with us, Rob.
Thank you, Caroline. Thank you, Chris, and thank you to Riot. We're very excited to be a part of the Riot ecosystem and doing what we can to help the members be successful. We are specialists at regulatory compliance and conformity assurance issues, and today's webinar is going to focus on some upcoming European regulation changes, one of which was more political than regulatory, which is Brexit, and how that affects the UK market access. And then the other one will be some very important changes to the European Union market regarding any CE marking products. And so let's get started. Who we are, just give you a quick little thumbnail. We provide international type approvals and conformity solutions. So this includes all the way at the design, the concept level or the prototyping stage, design for compliance services, project management of the testing if needed, providing the post-testing approvals and certifications. We have a lot of local holder and in-country representation options for various countries. We also provide a lot of regulatory conformance intelligence like this webinar today. Many clients of ours come to us for country reports asking for what the thresholds are and the requirements are to meet, to launch into a multi-nation market launch. And we also have something called iVault, which is a very unique and efficient way of housing your certification documents. When you're a startup and you only have one product line, that's one thing. But as you grow to 5 or 10, all the disparate documents can get out of control. So it's nice to have one regulatory repository to focus on them from. We have a strategic partner. It's called the CE Marking Authority. He was planning to help present today. He's suffering from some COVID, so if we could all send out some good wishes to Chris. He seems to be okay. He's just recovering. But I'll be presenting the entire webinar today. CE Marking Authority, they are a notified body, both in Europe and in Great Britain, the UK. And they provide both marking guidance for both Europe and UK, as well as the roles and responsibilities for various players in that ecosystem. And we'll touch on what those definitions of the players in the supply chain from manufacturer to the end user are in this webinar. Of course, there is some legislative framework for both markets now that he specializes on, and out of the many notified options that they offer, one of their unique specialties is hazardous locations. For those of you who don't know what hazardous locations are, it's something you should be aware of. You may get requirements or, requests for proposals for clients who might want to use your IoT devices in a hazardous location environment, and it's a special type of certification for that. It's as the name suggests, it's a very hazardous location. So this could be a grain refinery, sugar refinery, dry cleaning establishments. ESD events in those environments can actually be catastrophic. And every year I hear on the news of at least one or two situations where you have an explosion. So that's one of the things that they specialize in. So Europe is going through changes. We talked at the top of the slide about Brexit, how Europe is no longer part of the EU. There used to be 28 member nations. Now there's 27. And so what does that mean for CE marking versus the new UK CA mark? Conformity Assessment is what the CA stands for. For those of you who don't know, CE stands for Communauté d'Europe, which in English means European Conformity Community, the European Community. Sorry. So in French, it's CE. That's where that term comes from. And so there's big changes in Europe, and we're going to get into some of those right now. So what is Brexit? Well, we had a European Union of 28 member nations with UK withdrawing as of the 2018 Act. As of a few days ago, January 1st, 2021, it is official. It affects a lot of product safety, metrology, and other industries, as we'll talk about today. And the transition period for Brexit comes to an end this year. But the first transition started a few days ago on the 1st. So this affects economic operators, and there is a transition period for many things, but one of the main requirements as of now is the UK CA marking. This has to do with your label, and it applies to most goods that are subject to placing CE marking on their label. And if you have a very unique product type, we can help you determine if yours falls into that requirement. Most of the IoT devices will need to comply with the marking requirements. So this marking requirement is supposed to be met. You're supposed to meet the UK regulations and conformity assessment processes and the standards that can be used to demonstrate conformity to the European requirements. The reason for that is many of the BSI, British Standards Institute standards, haven't been issued yet. So those are in the process. And right now they're just allowing you to declare to European Union standards that apply to your product. If you want to place products on the market for January 1st next year, you'll need to provide proof that you have a compliant device, and that could be providing the relevant documents, including contracts of sales, invoices, and documents. The reason for this is because you are able to warehouse products in Europe ahead of that effective date. But they want to see that you're not just warehousing it, it's actually connected to a deal or potential deal. So you want to sell all of your goods to the end user by the 1st of January, 2022, or you have to take them back. So you have a little window there to get products into the market, but if it's not tied to a specific contract, then you may need to bring it back after that 1 year. The conformity assessment processes that could be used to demonstrate conformity are roughly the same as CE. And as I mentioned, there's a transition period to the New Year's Eve of this year. However, if there's, for any reason, if the Europe or UK updates their standards and the others doesn't, you'll have to work to iron that out. What I mean is there's some BSI standards in process for certain product types that may create a conflict if you're simply relying on the passing, testing, and declarations for EU standards. It's also possible to apply both marks, the UKCA mark and the CE mark, as long as the standards listed on the Declaration of Conformity remain the same. As I mentioned, as soon as a different standard is published, and if it happens to be within those 2 years that I talked about, then you might need to remove the mark or bring the product into compliance with both standards. So here is a list of the UK regulations that will require the UKCA mark. And they all come into force January 1. Well, just 5 days ago. There is a mandatory requirement to the UKCA mark for medical and PE pressure equipment that doesn't have a transition period. And it introduces an aerosol regulation as well that requires UKCA marking. I don't think that's going to affect any IoT products. The main changes that will affect manufacturers is that the authorized representative and importers based in Europe will no longer be recognized in Great Britain. If you need to use an authorized representative or an importer, then they must reside in the UK when selling to the UK. You will need to use the new UKCA marking now. So if you're shipping to to UK, this needs to be addressed right away. And this is what applies. If it's only for market in the Great Britain, Well, if it's covered by legislation that requires the UK CA marking. So, i.e., like the medical and PE and the aerosols. But it doesn't apply to existing stocks. I mentioned a second ago. There is a small transition window there. Now, when placing the mark on the product, the manufacturer takes full responsibility for conformity and compliance to the UK legislation. The manufacturer must ensure that they have tested to the latest technical standards and the latest published standards. So the mark must be visible and it must be legible. We're talking about a minimum height of 5 millimeters minimum. However, if the product, and this does apply to a lot of IoT devices, if the product is impossible to reduce the size, then it can be put into the user's manual. And we can help you with the right verbiage and the right placement in your user's manual, which will typically be a regulatory section of your user's manual. So giving you time there to absorb all that. Technical documentation. The information you must keep, and it's going to vary depending on the specific legislation and what types of standards that are applicable to your products. The manufacturer must keep records for at least 10 years after the product is placed on the market. If the product is designed, it's shown to conform to the relevant requirements. The address of the manufacturer and the facility. So all of that needs to be at the bottom of the technical file. And it must be available to be provided with the authorities asking for it. It needs to be readily available to them. So this is more of a illustration, more of a pictorial slide. So the green section on your left, it's a list of technical requirements that needs to be in the technical construction file. You must always have a description of the product, like a theory of operations, material data sheets, drawings, assessments to the standards, like an engineering justification of the assessment path that you used, the results and design calculations, test reports, and then a copy of the user's guide or manual. The manual covers handling, transportation, installation, operation, maintenance, and the decommissioning of the product. Now, anything under 13 kilos doesn't need to have the handling instructions, but of course you do want to have your markings art file in there, and most importantly, your declaration of conformity. From that, you want to look at the purple box. And this shows you what must be done when you're serializing your product. You have to have your technical file listing the standards required, production testing, and these records must be maintained for traceability. You will be required update the DOC when there's even a batch number change to the same customer or individual serial numbers. Now the blue box also talks about serialization of products. What you have to do is, when a standard gets updated, if the standard you're using to demonstrate compliance is updated, you must update your technical file and DOC. So there's also design changes that also must be a trigger for a technical file. Now there are some design option processes that could be utilized. You have to decide upon the change and modification, how to describe it. You have to conduct an assessment against the design change and against the compliance standard. Determine in your assessment if there needs to be additional testing. Update the manual if needed. And of course, update the DOC. There's one thing when you do the design options, you could only do as a design option on the original technical file. You can't do a design option on a design option. So if standards are updated, which is rare, multiple times in a year, you have to go back to the very first technical file, the very first standard, and take it all into consideration. But you are allowed to batch that update at the end of the year. You could do it within 1 calendar year. Now the DOC for United Kingdom, this varies, but generally it should include this name and address is for the business, the design firm that manufactures it, even if it uses a contract manufacturer. It's the company that designs the product and is responsible. The serial number, the model, type identification, a statement that the person who's signing it is taking full responsibility for the product's compliance. Details of the approval body. Typically, this would be a notified body. So you can describe who assisted you in this assessment, And of course, within that, the conformity assessment procedure used. What legislation, what relevant UK legislation the product complies with. And under or within that legislation, which designated standards were used to demonstrate compliance, but also the publication dates of those standards. Yes, the name and signature, both, and then the date of declaration, and if applicable, supplementary information. This could apply when you manufacture outside of the UK. You have to state where the technical file is stored in the UK. This could be Wales, the Great Britain itself, or Scotland. In this case, Northern Ireland is still part of EU. So this is a DOC for the UK. And this is something that needs to be paid attention to for every product, every family. So if you look at section 5, this is talking about the standards. So there could be more or less depending on your product type. It depends on what applies to your product. Now the standards in section 6 these standards in section 6 have a date. It's very important. So when you're doing your updates, if you don't put the dates of the standards, you don't know which was the last dated standard you complied your products to. So you'd have to go back to the beginning, which could be very, very expensive, especially for large product families. Now in section 7, I'll give you a second to read all that. And this would be the section where you would also add where the technical file is housed and the name of the contact person. If it's not the same person who signed it, and typically it won't be now after this new legislation I'll talk to on the second part of the seminar, this is where you're also going to list where and who is responsible for the technical file. And then I will show you a European. I'm sorry, I had it transposed, forgive me. Christopher typically talks on this section. I just refer to the European Union DOC. This is the Great Britain DOC. It's very similar, as you see. And here you'll see on this format, These are all British standards, but this is a template that I'm showing you now. The standards being used are identical at the moment. That's really the only change. Everything remains the same. Section 7 would be where you would list who is housing your technical file. But there are some standards that are being updated that will change this template for you. But let's talk about definitions for a second. These are key definitions, actually. That's part of the Brexit Ukca process, because this is very important, how the regulations have been developed, especially in the later years as this rolls out. So manufacturer is a person who manufactures the equipment or has the equipment designed and or manufactured and markets that equipment under their name or trademark. That's key, under their own name or trademark. An importer is a person established in the UK who places equipment from a country outside the UK into the Great Britain market for sale. For this specific definition, it does include a person based in Northern Ireland who has been supplied with a product from a European Economic Area country, or under the national legislation law would be a distributor. Under the UK, Ukca procedure, they would be an importer. Now, distributor, excuse me, is a person in the supply chain other than the manufacturer, the importer, who makes equipment available in the market. Now, the authorized representative is somebody who has been appointed formally in writing by the manufacturer to perform specific tasks for the manufacturer. That person must be appointed in writing, and it's not required, but a good place to keep the authorized representative letter would be in the technical file. Makes it much easier to find later. Hopefully, if you have any questions on that, we can touch on those at the end of the talk today. So that was definitions. And this section is about the obligations of manufacturers. And if my cadence is slow, I try to be purposefully slow to help everybody read the text of each slide. But I think that has been done. So let me touch on the important parts of this section. Before placing the equipment that has been marked as compliant under Ukca, the manufacturer must ensure the equipment has been designed and manufactured with the principal safety elements of the safety objectives. That's very important. You're going to hear that wording a lot in this webinar and over the years. Has it been designed and manufactured in accordance with the principal safety elements. In the past, in CE marking world, it's really about does the manufactured product meet certain tests. In this case, they're going deeper. They want to know that it's been designed to certain product principal safety elements as well. So it really touches more on were certain QMS principles followed during the design procedure. And we will touch on the QMA requirements later in this webinar. So these manufacturers must also have a relevant conformity assessment procedure carried out and the technical documentation drawn up. That means you have to describe this process. Then you can draw up a declaration of conformity, affix the Ukca mark, and manufacturers must keep this documentation for 10 years. If there is a update to the technical file for either serialization purposes or design updates, a new 10-year window starts. Important items to go on the label: name of the company, registered trade name or registered trademark, and the address, the type, batch, or serial number, or other equivalent identification, and to ensure that it's accompanied by instructions which are clear, legible, and easily understandable in English. There's more to that last 3 words than meets the eye. So if there are serious grammatical issues, that could be a call for a deficiency by the authorities. So this is a continuation of the obligations of the manufacturers. So they must make sure that the procedures are in place for series productions to remain in conformity with Part 2 of the 2016 regulations. So by doing that, they must take account of any changes in equipment design and characteristics, as well as any changes in the standards or in other technical specifications by reference to which Ukca declaration was drawn up. This is a big one, and it is a little different than how CE marking, the compliance path was unfolded over the last 30 years now almost. So they must show how they monitor equipment that they manufacture, how they manufacture in line with their technical file. So they must investigate any complaints and, if required, take action. So this is something also that's something different and new from European requirements. So basically, if there is a incident reported, they must show that they investigated it, and if it was of a serious nature to people or property, take immediate action, which would include recall The importer, let me jump to that slide. Now, the importer must also, this is key, the importer must also ensure that the device or system is also in conformity with the principal elements of the safety objectives and that the obligations of the 2016 regulations have been met. Now, if there is an incident brought to their attention or if they know that it presents a risk, they must inform the manufacturer and the market surveillance authority of that risk. This is something that the UK is saying they're going to take very seriously. Now, this legal requirement is that the importer must show their due diligence that the relevant conformity assessment was carried out properly by the manufacturer. So that would include looking at the technical documentation drawn up by the manufacturer. They could rely on the UK CA marking, as well as the Declaration of Conformity. And likewise, as to the manufacturer, they must keep a record of this Declaration of Conformity and the technical documentation for a period of 10 years. And this importer must provide their name, their registered trade name, and an actual postal address, not a PO box, where they can be contacted. And they must, this can be on the equipment or on the packaging or in an accompanying document. Could be an insert, could be part of the manual. So this is a continuation of the obligations of importers, which requires that the importers ensure that the equipment is accompanied by instructions which are easily written in easily understandable English. And they, as we touched upon before, they must inform the manufacturer with regard to any risk posed to consumers or property, carry out sample testing of equipment, and investigate complaints. Let me jump to the distributor. The distributor is basically somebody who's not the importer or not the manufacturer. The distributor must act to take care and ensure that the equipment that as in the first two categories, that the product ensures that is in conformity with the principal elements of the safety directive. So you see a common thread here. All three players in the ecosystem here in this supply chain must meet this principal elements of the safety directive. If a distributor thinks that the equipment is not in conformity, they must not make the equipment available for sale until it has been brought up to conformity. So as with Europe, the requirements on the manufacturer only, now there's new, when we're talking UK, requirements on the importer and requirements on the distributor. If it's somehow learned that there was a risk and the distributor did not follow their parts, there could be fines. What does that mean? Well, to avoid those fines, the distributor must verify that the equipment bears the UKCA marking. It is accompanied by the required instructions and safety information if applicable, and that the importer and manufacturer and/or manufacturer have complied with their obligations as to the required labeling. So as you see in these last 3 slides, this is a new way of bringing products to market that is different and new from Europe. So this is the last slide on the obligations of distributors. So if they do believe that there was something wrong, they must take action. That's the basic premise of the requirement. And they must also cooperate with authorities. Now, the obligations of authorized representatives. This is where the manufacturers are able, through a written mandate, appoint a competent, that's an important word, authorized representatives to perform certain tasks on their behalf. Certain manufacturers have an office in one of those 3 UK countries, and they may assign somebody within the organization to fill this role as signing the DOC. But if that person is not competent in regulatory regulatory matters, that's a very dangerous move, because this person must be able to validate the technical files. It's the type of person you go to for your certification. It's a regulatory professional, essentially. So this is the person who will do the EU marking compliance and the UK marking compliance. It's somebody who knows how to read and approve technical files, well, also how to generate them. And that can attest that it meets the requirements of all the regulations, and then therefore you can put it on the market. So you have to choose wisely of who you designate as your authorized representative. Why? Because of enforcement penalties. There are local trading standards authorities who have a duty, deputized or authorized by the 2016 regulations, to provide fines of up to 2 years or a £30,000 fine to the authorized representative. So now the equipment can also be applied in different workplace environments. There's an additional authority called the Health and Safety Executive, and that has a duty to enforce the regulations. And in Great Britain, they could fine you up to 4% of turnover for the past 4 years, and or a prison sentence. A lot of that latter part, the prison sentence, has to do with what level of due diligence can you demonstrate, and the nature of the deficiency, the nature of the matter at hand. But out of the two, the HSE is somebody you definitely don't want knocking on your door and going through your files. But they usually get involved only, excuse me, only after there's been an incident or there's been somebody who has, somebody has reported a business, and that's the number one way that typically um, these fines come is somebody, a competitor reports you. Okay, so for the new, let's transfer now to the new market surveillance regulation. So this is something that comes into effect July 16th, 2021. And it is also referred to as the new market surveillance regulation, and there's something that they're taking very seriously. In the past, when they've come out with new directives like Rojas 2, they said we're going to take it very seriously, and they really didn't. But this is changing the whole game. This is the chilling effect of this is quite massive, and it lays down rules and procedures for economic operators through the entire supply chain, much like what we just saw in the UK approach. And it's also strengthening the market surveillance and providing a framework for controls. Now, this is something that Brexit signed Great Britain signed before Brexit, meaning this applies to all 28 member nations, including all of the UK. So it means that in a product is on sale online or through other means of distance sales, the product should be considered to have been made available to the market if the offer for sale is targeted at end users, in particular with fulfillment service providers. Now, fulfillment service providers is anybody who sells it to the end user. But for purposes of this new requirement, we can think about Amazon. And Amazon right now does have thousands of people who are scrubbing their products through, and this doesn't just have to do with hardware, it has to do with sunglasses, t-shirts, toys, all of which have a CE marking requirement. And so they're very busy because of this upcoming rule change. So modern supply chains and companies encompasses a wide variety of economic operators who should all be subject to enforcement of harmonized legislation. So they're changing this whole paradigm from manufacturers to the entire supply chain. So an economic operator means any of the following. It could be a manufacturer established in the union, or an importer, distributor, very similar to the UK definitions. But here's the key on the bottom. Fulfillment service provider is somebody who sells it to the final person, the final end user. Could be business to business or to a consumer. So the economic operator, which as we just learned on this slide, is the whole supply chain, must produce a declaration of conformity, ensure the technical file is stored in one of the member nations. And in the case of this new requirement, it could be in the UK, which is great because you don't have to do it twice. You do it once for both markets. They must make sure that all the documentation is accurate and be ready to provide to authorities upon request, and the contact information of the economic operators, as well as who and where the technical file is being housed. So what are the new takeaways? Well, every company now needs to produce new DOCs, both for the UK and the European Union. The new DOCs must call out where the file is being housed, meaning it has to be stored at an authorized representative's location. Now, if you have an office in one of those countries, that's great. That could suffice as long as the person in your team is someone who's considered competent to create, review, approve technical files, and is willing to sign the DOC. So that is a big deal. So you also need to select that authorized representative very soon. you have 6 months before the regulations take effect. The one issue that I didn't highlight on this slide that is very important as well is that there are QMS requirements that UK has initiated. So what that means is quality management systems like an ISO 9000, 9001. If that's something you don't have currently, it could take easily 6 months to a year to even for a small firm. It's not a small fee to obtain that. So what some companies do is they will use their manufacturer's ISO 9000 or their contract manufacturer's ISO, and they'll stand on that. But for UK, they do require a QMS. I see that we're up against the hour, so hopefully that was informative and that you learned a lot. If there's any questions, you can send them in, and I will, one by one respond to them after the webinar. And so that concludes we don't have much time for questions. So there's our contact information. And of course, Caroline can help you as well with the questions. Thank you, Caroline.
Thanks, Rob. That was really great. Thank you for the very informative lunch and learn. We'll take a couple questions before we sign off. The first question we have here, Rob, is, does the company header need to be on the DOC?
Yes.
Perfect. Okay, that was a short and easy one. Okay. Here's another one. Can you provide an example of a technical file that is in compliance with UKCA?
Yeah, I presented one in the webinar. I can provide you that the person asking the question, if you want to get a hold of me, I can provide you that template. But of course, how you fill out that section 5 and 6 of which standards is going to depend on the product type. But if that's what you're asking, I can get you that template.
Thanks, Rob. Next question here. Are there any resources you recommend for coming up to speed with these changes for those who are still in their prototyping phases?
Well, there are many firms like iCertifi, and there's many notified bodies out there like CE Marking Authority. But of course, we'll be glad to help you prepare for and manage the whole process. iCertifi can help with a lot of testing plan, in terms of design reviews, product safety construction reviews. We can help with preparing for the testing. We can manage the testing if needed in terms of interface with the labs. CE Marking Authority is a notified body, so they could act as an authorized representative in terms of scrubbing the technical file. Notified bodies like CE Marking Authority will not take on the role of the authorized rep until they've had a chance to review and approve the technical file. So yes, we can be that team for you. iCertifi and CE Marking Authority.
Thanks, Rob. And then the last question I'm seeing here, and again, if you have any questions that you want to reach out to Rob directly, Rob, if you don't mind just showing that slide again before we leave. And of course, you can always reach out to me, caroline@riot.org. We'll post Rob's email address as well. But the last question that I have here, just so this person's clear, the UKCA label only applies for devices going on sale for the first time in 2021. Is that correct, Rob?
Well, anytime. I mean, if you were selling in 2018 or 2019, 2020, and you're selling after January, it needs to have that mark now. And if they need help, you can go to uk.gov to get the art, the constraints and the requirements. There's a section at the uk.gov that talks about the labeling sizes and the ready-made art that you can download from their site. But yes, as of now, there needs to be a marking change for your product.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Rob. Thanks again to everyone for attending our first 2021 Lunch and Learn. And you, again, can find this entire presentation on Riot's YouTube channel and Meetup page. That'll be live tomorrow. I encourage you to reach out, connect with Rob if you have additional questions. Thank you so much for being here, Rob. We appreciate it.
Thank you. Cheers.
Take care, everyone.